Hello everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us at today's workshop. Lovely to see some familiar faces. Just as people are still joining the call, if you could just let us know in the chat that you can see and hear this, see the screen and hear us clearly. Give us a quick thumbs up or a yes, that'd be amazing. And as I'm sure you're all aware, we like to run our virtual training events as if we're in the room together. So we really encourage interaction here. If you can have your cameras on, if that's possible, that would be fantastic. We love for you to join us in the room. We want to make this as much like an in-person event as possible, really interactive. Fantastic. So I'd like to, before we get started, we would like to, in the spirit of reconciliation, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we're all learning today. So we'd like to pay our respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So I'd like to do a quick pulse check just before we dive in. If you can pop into the chat, what is it that brought you here today? What are you excited to learn, to hear about today? What's coming up for you in regards to this title, Enterprise Influence? I'm personally very excited about this, and I'm going to share in just a moment what we're going to be covering. But I'd love to also hear from you in the chat. What is it that's really excited you about this particular workshop today? And while you're popping into the chat, we're going to be covering why title-based authority is potentially outdated and why strategic influence really is that new currency in complex environments. We're also going to be covering the number one predictor of influence at the executive level and how to install that in your leadership, and also what the latest organizational research shows about persuasion and why authority does not equal buy-in. So if you are able to pop into the chat, just one thing that you're excited to learn about today, that would be fantastic. And while we're waiting for people to jump on and dive into the chat, I want to give you some context around how enterprise influence really fits within our broader Amplify model. So Amplify model, this is a TLS framework which is designed to cover every piece of the puzzle in building a healthy, high-performing team that consistently delivers on your organization's strategy. So if you're a leader who's potentially finding that your people are busy, but maybe they're not quite aligned, then that can signal that there are gaps to address in your strategy and how that's clearly understood. Also, if you're finding that maybe your strategy execution feels slow or frustrating, it can point to challenges in that broader system that need to be aligned and streamlined. Or maybe you're finding that people are pushing harder, but the results don't really stick. That can show that your people need the right support, capability, and culture to really sustain their performance in that area. So enterprise influence really is an overarching capability within this model that enables leaders to really align, activate, and amplify their impact across boundaries. So you're not just managing within your own team, but you're shaping outcomes across the enterprise. So this model is the basis of one of our signature programs called Amplify, which we're going to share about a little bit at the end of today's session, for those of you who might want to continue on this journey. So we've got some people popping into the chat. This is fantastic. We've got Alyssa with quite a hierarchical structure and keen to look at different levers. Fantastic. Jenny, develop my leadership skills, build my toolkit. Wonderful. Rebecca, keen to reflect on old assumptions that might hold you back. Marco, transitioning into emerging leader position. Fantastic. I've just missed that there. Requiring influence, higher up management. Fantastic. Some wonderful insights there into what you're excited about in this at this time. Now I'm going to introduce you to our two wonderful facilitators who are going to be taking us through today's session. So we're going to be covering the why, really setting the scene, the influencing without authority model, so the what, and then the operationally the influencing without an authority model, how we really make that happen. So I'd love to introduce you to Phillip Ralph, our founder and CEO at the Leadership Sphere, and Louise Duncan, TLS Senior Consultant and Facilitator.
Hey, morning, everyone. Fantastic. Thank you, Kelly, for that lovely, generous introduction. So it's lovely to see some familiar faces here. So over the years. Yeah, I'm really excited about today, actually. So I just wanted to introduce myself briefly and the organization. So I've spent pretty much my whole working life working with people and understanding systems. So understanding systems, influencing and change. I spent some time with Victoria Police, around 18 years, where I was did a whole bunch of things working with 10,000 police officers around conflict resolution, communication, and influencing in those critical moments when sometimes there's only seconds to do so to avoid fatal outcomes. That program had some pretty amazing impacts on the fatality rate. I'm trained as a negotiator and also in conflict resolution. Wrote a book in 2010 around leadership, particularly with an adaptive leadership lens, and then had a revised edition in 2017. And yeah, really, nearly 2 decades now working in the leadership sphere, helping organizations from just about every industry and sector around leadership, culture, and change. So yeah, really excited. So I think this webinar really brings together 3 decades of thinking, understanding, looking at world's best practice, and really understanding complex systems and how do you really influence across the enterprise, both at a systems level and a people level. So with that, I will hand over to Lou to introduce yourself, Lou.
Right. Thanks, Phil. Yeah, hi, everyone. It's really lovely to be joining you here. So, yes, I'm a senior consultant, facilitator, and coach with TLS, and I work quite closely with Phil around our signature programs, leadership excellence, high-performing teams, organisational excellence, and then other programs that we develop in consultation with our clients. I'm particularly passionate about this topic and systems thinking and how we can understand the big picture to support us in the ways as leaders that we need to build our understanding to find the best way forward. And I've worked with people for more than 30 years, particularly in that space where they know that the old is no longer working, but they're not yet sure about what the new looks like. And this work that we're doing this morning, it absolutely is in that space. How do we find our way forward, particularly in these complex times? So really looking forward to working with you as we move through the workshop. Thanks, Phil.
Excellent. Thanks, Lou. So here's a structure, as Kelly mentioned. So we promised you, what was the number one predictor of influence and how to install that in your leadership team. So let's have a look at that now. The single most important skill and most undervalued capacity for exercising adaptive leadership is diagnosis. So that's a quote from Ron Heifetz at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, who had the pleasure of studying with in 2010. So in order to build the muscle of diagnosis, we're going to dig into a few critical concepts. So we're going to start really big picture, and then as we progress throughout the 90 minutes, we're really going to get more and more granular, both on the system and the people part. So the data is not great in terms of a track record for managers and leaders around how we do diagnose and discover. So we think this is a critical element of really being able to influence in a meaningful way. So this is some of the reality. So in today's organizations, and the data, excuse me, the data doesn't really paint a very pretty picture, and most of this is not new. You would have seen this information before around engagement, dissatisfaction with strategy execution, team performance, really, hinging on psychological safety and some of those critical elements, and the fact that trust levels are generally pretty low, and the relationship with employee and boss and organization is a bit fraught at times. So this really sets the foundation and the backdrop to, well, how do we lead differently? How do we engage differently? And so I love this from Mikhail Zanini and Gary Hamel, who talk about, you understand that the fastest way to erode your real leadership capital is to bludgeon others with your positional authority. So there's no secret about what drives engagement, what drives change and influence. And the formula really hasn't changed for 60 years around autonomy, collegiality, and the opportunity to grow, some of the key things that people really need to be able to engage. There's an engagement deficit in organizations. And so what people need to be able to do their work in a meaningful way often isn't present. So enterprise-wide influence should be about discovering and testing, not engineering and imposing. And despite all of the research kind of giving us pretty strong signals as to what's required, we seem to revert to this top-down change management philosophy rather than a top-down and bottom-up approach, letting change bubble up. Lou and I are about to work with a a very large Australian organisation where people are being hurt, basically, and the approach for us is going to be, bubbling up across several hundred people, in fact, a few thousand people. How do we create meaningful change at the systems level? It's not through, decreeing this is the new culture. We actually just start creating that new culture. So there's a couple of case studies that are really they're funny, but also compelling around, organizations. And I'll just get you to read through some of these bullet points quickly, just kind of skim read them, but I'll call some out as well. Have you ever seen a colleague behave in this way? Insist on going through the right channels, advocating caution, bringing up irrelevant issues as frequently as possible, multiply the procedures and clearances involved in issuing instructions and paychecks, and so we kind of have this bureaucracy. Just pop in the chat if you've seen any of these behaviours in the last 4 weeks. So let's keep it really, really narrow. Just a yes, definitely. Yep, thanks, Alyssa. Now, the weird thing about this list is, and everyone can identify with it, right? Where did that list come from? So in 1944, at the height of World War II, a guy called William Donovan was the director of the United States, which is the precursor for the CIA. They were looking at ways to sabotage enemy organizations and enemy communities. So they created that list and they had a manual effectively that they provided to ordinary citizens to create those behaviors or do those behaviors to undermine and sabotage the effectiveness and efficiency of organizations. So it's like a field manual, and yet we still see those behaviors in organizations today with monotonous frequency. So the future of work. So as I said, this is kind of the macro big picture before we get into the more detail. But I think one of the things that we talk about a lot at the leadership sphere is managers are generally addicted to control. We have this illusion that we can control people and systems. We have invalid operating systems. So operating systems which were created 100, 150, 200 years ago, which worked well in the factory shop floor, but are woefully inadequate in today's contemporary organizations. And so what we do with organizations, we try and partner with them around creating an evolutionary organization where the operating system actually supports, meaningful, impactful change and execution on the strategy. The thing is, though, that everything has changed except management. And the last case study I'd like to show you is, this is an org chart. Just in the chat, what year do you think this organizational chart comes from? Just to hazard a guess. What year do you think this was created? (1970), 2019, current? Yep. Okay, any other guesses? 1932. The list is going low ball. 2025. Well done, Marty. So here's the thing. It came from 1800. Sorry, we hear a whole range of dates from 2025 to 1800. It doesn't matter, which country or what group. People just are guessing, right? People call that haphazard guesses, kind of laughing under your breath, right? Because the reality is, that this looks like a contemporary organization, even though it comes from a railway organization in 1910. And so the way we structure organizations, the way we operate organizations really hasn't changed much. And so we can't really carbon date organizational charts, but if I'd ask you to carbon date some of these things, you'd probably be able to do it much more accurately, whether it be a camera, a car, address, etc. So we're trying to create the case for change, I guess, if we're going to influence across the enterprise, if we're going to understand how systems work, we really need to understand the operating system and the old way of thinking about organizations, which is, still very prolific. Also from Humanocracy, which I quoted earlier, in practice, organizational change tends to be either trivial or traumatic. And we still know that about 80% of change does not work. And again, McKinsey originally came up with that figure. but it's been replicated in numerous ways by numerous people. So the actual benefits that we're doing the M&A activity around or trying to change are not realized as a result of poor change leadership. And finally, to finish off this little section on the macro view by Maxwell, which I really like, everything rises and falls on leadership. And yes, we're in the leadership business, so we have a particular view on leadership, but at the end of the day, leadership does drive or disable organizational capability and results. So with that, I would love to hand over to Lou, who's really going to take us through the model now, and what is this influencing model and how might we start to structure some of our challenges. So over to you, Lou.
Great, thanks, Phil. So with all of that in mind, can I just ask, has everyone got their workbook? Did you receive a workbook? Great. It's in the chat if you haven't received it. So this is the influencing without authority model, and we're using it really with the lens of enterprise influence today. So thinking more broadly around our influencing challenges that we have. Now, if I just take a step back for a moment and think about, well, what is influence? And really, if we think about it's the ability to guide or inspire or shift the thoughts, behaviors, actions, decisions of others, but through connection, through understanding and deep understanding on very different layers and levels, creating empathy, having a shared purpose instead of through coercion, control, or authority. So this model essentially can be thought of in three parts. The first part takes up areas 1, 2, and 3, and it's about understanding. We need to spend a significant amount of time understanding the challenge and the environment within which that challenge operates before we even begin to think about planning and action. So the first part is understanding, sections 1, 2, and 3. The second part is the planning part, the guiding, and then the last is the engagement, and that's where the action takes place. Now, what I will also want to say is that Phil and I are going to work methodically through this today, just take you through each of the parts. But in real life, it's not set and forget. It's not once around and you're done. It's iterative. As you deepen your understanding and your insight, as you test out, you continue to adapt. And particularly in our complex world, we need to stay agile. We need to understand that as we build our understanding, that we can adjust and shift as needed so that we can move forward in the most productive way. So this operates also within a dual focus. It's system and people. When I say system, what I mean is that we're sitting back and we're looking at all the different elements within which we're operating. In the organization, it would be people, processes, technology, what's been inherited, what works for us, what doesn't, but it's also externally what impacts the system, clients, stakeholders, customers, suppliers. Did I say suppliers? Yeah, all those different elements. Yeah, what is the system and how does it interact? Does it interact in ways that support the organization and the common purpose and the change initiative or not? And what happens on all the different layers? So that's the system, and that's our focus today. That's the enterprise influence. But there's also the people side of it. Then there's the diagnosis and the engagement and the influencing and the outcomes. So the first section, absolutely, it's goals. Of course, we've got to start there. We've got to start thinking about what is it? What is our influencing challenge and what do we need to achieve? What is the best way forward? Often what happens is we need to get really clear before we even start working, but often people or organizations or teams, they don't spend enough time developing the clarity, and that's the biggest hurdle. We're on different pages or have different understandings, and that creates even more complexity and more challenge with which we're working. So we need to start, let's get as clear as we can before we dive in to the understanding on different layers. So thinking about that, just moving forward here, the next element is the diagnosis phase. Now, this is where we're going to spend most of our time today, because organizations need, and people, leaders and teams, we need to build that muscle of diagnosis. We often skip over this, particularly with the systems lens, and then we're making decisions based on inaccurate or understandings or just complete misunderstandings. So this is where we're going to spend most of our time today. The next area is in relation to the people. Remember, systems and people. We need to spend time. Who do we need to influence and why? Why do we need to influence them? How are we going to bring them on board? What are the trust levels like? What are their currencies? And what I mean by this is what is important to them. What is important to them? And then also through neuroscience lens. We're going to touch on these today. We're obviously not going to have time to go in depth on these, but we'll have a brief exploration of that. Next one is the planning. After you've spent a lot of time understanding, that's when we move on to the planning. And as you plan, you then move on into the final stage, which is the engagement. But again, it's iterative. So as you're building, you're moving backwards and forwards throughout the whole program, throughout the whole model. So on page 8, you have a game plan. And this is just a really lovely way. It captures all the key elements of the model for you to be able to work with and build clarity around the different elements that you're exploring. We'll touch on elements of this today, but as I said, the most important thing for Phil and I and Kelly is that you have the capacity to take this and run with it after our session today. So that's the model. How do we operationalize it? It's great having a concept, it's great sort of saying, yeah, well, how do we actually use it? So this is what we're going to dive into now. Thinking about goals, getting really clear, what is it, what you want? As I mentioned, lack of clarity causes more issues, and we don't even realize we have a lack of clarity at times. We just think. So we need to spend time getting really clear on the goals. Ways to think about that is in relation to our position, our interests, and our needs. So when I say position, how are you showing up? And it's about what you say you want, what the organization says it wants. How are you showing up? Because that will determine, or that's often comes from the place, how do you want to be perceived? So you need to be clear about that. The next layer is about, well, what are your interests? And this is what we say, why we say what we want. We need to, again, understand that before we can then actually peel back the layers and get to our needs. What are the actual needs here? Now, the reason that we need to think about these different levels in relation to your goals is because it supports the bigger picture, it supports the systemic understanding, and as leaders, we also need to know that from the personal lens. So if I can invite you just briefly to reflect on your influencing challenge, just for 60 seconds in your game plan on page 8, just what's front of mind. Just capture those salient elements for you. What is your goal? What is it that you're navigating? How would you like to move forward? Do you have any insight here and now about your position, your interests, or your needs? I'll just give you a minute. Great. Okay, so given we've only got a little bit of time, and Alyssa, I like your comment there about same words having different meanings. We need to get really clear around that, don't we? That can cause a lot of confusion. Like, we think we're on the same page, but we're actually at the opposite ends. So yeah, thank you. Really good point. Great. So that's the first section. I know you've only had a minute. Again, you're going to take this and run with it. But Phil, over to you.
Thank you.
Diagnosis.
Yeah, and it also probably goes without saying, but once we set a goal, of course, we often think that it's stuck in stone. But as Lou has said a couple of times, it's iterative. So sometimes even the goal changes as we interrogate, interact, with the system, or even if it's a person, right? Sometimes our goals need to change as well. And one of the measures of success of these kinds of changes is progress, not necessarily a finite kind of resolution. And so we'll dig into that a little more. So yeah, my piece today, I think one of the critical pieces is this diagnosis piece and really being able to see the world differently, because it really, really matters. And we see repeatedly over so many years that big change, big or small change efforts, influence efforts fail because people misdiagnosed the challenge in the first place. And there's so much pressure on leaders, so much pressure on you to just do something, just get it done, create a project plan, which is a technical, artifact, and away we go. But it's not, there's so much more to it than that. So we're going to be looking at the left-hand side now for the next 15 minutes or so. And having a bit of fun with it as well. We've presented this material in whole bunch of different kind of contexts, and people always really enjoy, thinking about it in a different way. So, complexity conscious is a word from a book called Brave New Work by Aaron Dignan, which is a fantastic book around evolutionary organizations. We hear a lot about, the years about, the VUCA environment and, complexity and ambiguity and what have you. But, suddenly the world's kind of full of surprises for us, and we know what complexity looks like, but we don't always know how to deal with it and how to work with it, because it can be really challenging. So we want to draw a distinction for you between what a complicated system might be and a complex system might be. So just by you can either sing it out or in the chat. So on the left-hand side, we've got a watch mechanism. Who thinks that's complicated? Maybe just to keep this simple, if you think it's complicated, write that in the chat. If you think it's complex, write that in the chat. So that's a watch mechanism, complicated or complex. Thank you. All right, awesome. We've got about a 50-50 split so far. What about the engine, complicated or complex? Just an engine out of a car. Complicated, complex, complex, complex. Excellent. All right, we'll come back to that in a sec. On the left-hand side is weather. Is weather complicated or complex? Lisa, not a mechanic. Yep. Nor am I. We're together on that one. Complex, complex. I'll just put annoying weather, but yeah, okay. Many have said complex. What about traffic? In this case, we've got a roundabout pictured there. Is traffic a complicated system or a complex system? All right, excellent. So like all other groups, we've got quite an array of difference. It's interesting, a lot of saying complicated for traffic. So let's now go back to the watch. So these two systems are complicated systems in that they are causal. So there's a cause and effect. We can take our watch to a watchmaker and she can kind of dabble around with it and probably fix it. We can take our car to a mechanic and there's a pretty good chance that they'll be able to dabble around with it, move this lever and that lever, and there'll be a predictable outcome. However, when we're thinking about weather, we call that dispositional, or it's unpredictable. We kind of know in this case, there's heavy dark rain clouds there. It's dispositional in that it has an attitude in the way it's trending, but we actually have no way of knowing where it's going to end up. It may rain or it may not rain. Similarly, the roundabout, and we all, presumably we all drive, and we know that other road users are very unpredictable. In a roundabout, it's dispositional. There's only two principles in the Southern Hemisphere. You operate in a clockwise direction and you give way to anyone who's in the roundabout. So there's some basic principles there, but we still don't actually know exactly how it's going to work. So it evolves sometimes in very unexpected ways. So that's the difference. So complicated, much more straightforward; complex, as it suggests, much more complex. So what does this mean for us in organizations? It means we're going to be dealing with both complicated and complex areas, and we need to be able to start to pull them apart and delineate what the difference is between those two systems, because we need to therefore act in a different way. So we can often struggle to understand the true challenge, because what many people do in organizations, they slap over a technical fix or a complicated fix, like a project plan or something like that, over a complex system, and they wonder why it doesn't behave in the way they're expecting. And so any wonder when we're trying to create change or influence at the enterprise level, our efforts often fail. So it is important to be able to understand those two pieces. One thing I'd like to mention again, this is from Brave New Work, and this is the punchline to enterprise-wide influence and is often really challenging for leaders to get their head around. But for me, it's such a critical area. We know how hard it is to change ourselves. I don't know about you, but in a number of goals I've made about getting fit or other goals I've made, if it's that hard to change ourselves, it's even harder to change other people. However, we think about it from a more systemic perspective. If we change the context or someone's understanding of their context, we can change behavior almost immediately. And so what we try and do, including a whole bunch of consultants who are out there working, we try and change mindsets, so how people think about things, and then we hope that will lead to behavior change. And sometimes it does, absolutely. There's a role for that. However, there are unwritten rules about how we behave in different contexts. And if we change that context, then we can change people's understanding of how they should be taking up their role, how they should be behaving in that context. So as a really quick example, if people go to an NRL, they've got finals this weekend or an AFL final last week, people behave in a certain way and they think they have permission to act in a raucous way, sometimes harass or name call players, versus if that same person was to walk into a lift, there's unwritten rules about how we should behave in lifts. We don't yell out in lifts. You don't normally take phone calls. Or if you're to walk into a church, people instantly talk more quietly. Why? There's no rules that says please be quiet. It's just our understanding of the context. And so the operating system that we see here is if we're able to start to change the operating system, so how we make decisions, how we structure the organization, how we performance manage, for example, how we set up those structures, we can change behavior quite quickly. There's no guarantees, but we've got a much better chance of doing that. One case study that I was personally involved in as the lead consultant many years ago, working with a large professional service firm, 200 partners in a law firm. And the managing partner said to me, "Hey, I just get the feeling that, partners are here to they're more interested in the commercial elements and making sure that they make a really good return, like, make a lot of money. I want this organization to be here in another 100 years. How do we change their behavior?" And so what we did was literally not talk about them. We talked about what your role as a partner is. And it moved from being, a commercial beast to a steward of the organization for the next 100 years. People started to change their behavior immediately. So changing the operating system is a much faster way to change behavior. But it's an and, right? Mindsets and behaviors is important. But if we miss the bigger picture, then we're probably going to, fail. So getting a little more practical now, there are 4 essential practices of adaptive leadership, which is, a lot of what we're really talking here today, which is about influence. This matrix is meant to indicate that it's best to start with what is salient to you. So, yes, there's arrows that go around here, but not for a minute should we believe this is a linear process, right? We might start with diagnosing the system, then we take action. And then we learn from that, and we might adapt how we're changing and how we're interacting with the system. But we also need to understand that we're part of that system. All behavior is co-created. And so often we look at others' behavior and go, oh, why are they behaving that way? There's a circular loop there that's happening in our behavior. So if your influencing challenge, for example, is about one individual, so that's not enterprise influence, it's about changing the behavior of one person, the best thing to do firstly is look at your behavior and how you're co-creating that behavior. It's not about blame or judgment, but you'll have a part in it in some way, shape, or form. And so, I guess the takeaway from this framework is how are we deploying ourselves in the service of that influencing challenge or changing people. How are we showing up? What are we saying, doing, or not saying or doing? And the only way we can understand a system better is by interacting with it, as I said earlier. We can't sit on the balcony or sit back at our desk and, kind of draw up an amazing, wizardry of a plan. That just doesn't work. We need to go out, talk to people, interact with people, test the heat in the system, which we'll be talking about shortly. So there's three primary lenses that we talk about. One is benign, the next one is personal, and the next one is technical. This is what most organizations are very familiar with, are very good at. What we need to be able to do though, as leaders, is move to a different place and be agile around this. The next part is being conflictual. What that means is, like, I'm kind of more the benign kind of guy. Oh, it is just what it is, or I trust them, or it doesn't mean anything, when I see someone. And then my wife, for example, is awesome at conflictual. She'll have 10 different reasons as to why someone said something. Go, how did you even see that? How did you even think that? But sometimes we wallpaper over things we see in organizations or ignore it, which is a benign interpretation, i.e. it's neutral, doesn't mean anything. But actually, how do we, have multiple interpretations of the same things we're seeing, which is conflictual? Personal versus systemic. Classic example, different professional service firm. I had the chair of this global professional services firm and the CEO had been fighting publicly for 3 years, completely damaging to the organization. Within 30 minutes, I was able to help them make rapid progress on it. We didn't talk about attribution of, values or, their character's poor. All I did was have a systemic lens. I said, tell me the role. What's your understanding of your role as chair, your role as CEO? Complete clash in terms of role. It had almost nothing to do with the human sitting in the role. Marketing and sales are other organizational fault lines where the role is in conflict. It's not about the people. And so unless we have that systemic understanding, we're going to keep, I was giving a keynote on influence without authority. When I say keynote, is kind of a half-day workshop. And when I got to this point, someone at the back of the room swore. And I went, oh, here we go. This is interesting. What's that about? And he goes, we've just sacked our marketing and sales directors. We've hired 2 new marketing and sales directors and they're still fighting. I said, there you go. Case in point. Fix the role connection and how the roles interact. And then it gives people in those roles a chance of success. Then technical versus adaptive. And, we've kind of covered that off already, but a technical lens is, organizational structure, job descriptions, bureaucracy, standard operating procedures, whereas adaptive is more about the head, more about the heart than the head. How do we actually change people's values, beliefs, understanding of their context? So, are they in a church or at the football? And we need to somehow help people navigate that. So again, hopefully we're getting a little more practical now as we continue through this 90-minute session. But we use this a lot. We use it if in our high performance team programs. We use it in our leadership programs. We've adapted it from Heifetz and used it in a whole range of ways. How to manage conflict. And so the first piece is observation, and the second piece is about interpretation. If I was to ask you what the difference between observation and interpretation was, just pop in the chat, please, or sing it out, whichever you're comfortable with. What's the difference between observation and interpretation? I'll just give you a moment to put that in the chat. Nice, Alyssa. Okay, excellent. So let's have a quick play with this and then I'll describe the difference. So thanks, Diane. What you see and interpret and make meaning of. Okay, so certainly agree with the first bit. So if you were to make an observation about the group right now, us as a group, what observations would you make? Just pop them in the chat. So let's get gritty on this. What observations would you make? All on video. Good one. Hard to dispute, Marty. Absolutely an observation. Excellent. Other observations? Smiling and nodding. Nice, Alyssa. Yep, we're all online mute, intently listening. So I guess how would we know that we're intently listening? So one could argue that's an interpretation. What are we doing that people are listening? So what are we actually seeing? The observation would be, we can see people aren't on their phones, et cetera, all on Zoom. Yep, I think you guys have done it before. All attentive. I thought you were going to say all attractive gay, which would be an interpretation. So we need to separate the observation part, which is about, it is subjective, but we try and make it as objective as possible, right? We try and look for behaviors. What are we actually seeing? Versus interpretation is when we apply meaning or multiple hypotheses. Lou and I were actually working down at a yacht club here in Melbourne, last year I think it was, Lou. And I was actually at this point in the model and someone said, "Oh, there's two police chasing someone," and it was on the beach, right? This yacht. There's two police literally chasing someone behind me in the large kind of floor to ceiling windows. And I said, "This is a great example. Uh, One interpretation is that they're chasing a suspect, which is what everyone in the room, there's about 30 people in the room, concluded. What other interpretations could there be? Observation, two police running, someone's running in front of them. Other interpretations that the group came up with was, oh, they're training for a marathon. Yep. Someone's drowning, so the guy in front is actually leading the police to the right location. So can you see how we trip over all of the time in organizations because we jump to interpretation, we jump to judgment. I like to say, don't believe everything you think. If you think something, go and test it and have multiple interpretations as to what you're seeing. So if you say people are engaged on this call, complete interpretation. People could be faking it till they make it. They could just be looking at the camera but thinking about, all of the emails they've got in their inbox. So how do you have multiple hypotheses and then go test it? And then we make an intervention. So, we might say something or do something or call a meeting, which is the intervention, and then the loop, continues. Seriously powerful framework, looks pretty benign. For teams that have trouble giving feedback to one another, this absolutely amplifies their ability to do that because we teach them how to make observations and then the team does the heavy lifting around interpretation rather than saying, hey, that's a bit rude or it feels judgmental or stop cutting people off. We keep it at the observation level. Hey, I notice not everyone is getting to finish what they're saying. And then it can take the heat out of it appropriately. All right, this is the last section before we move out of diagnosis, but I talked about technical and adaptive before, and you can see on the left-hand side some of the hallmarks of technical change. On the right-hand side, some of the hallmarks of adaptive. Unfortunately, our influencing challenge won't come with a big A on its forehead or a big T. The reality is that every single challenge that you have in organizations will have some components of both. I've been challenged on that comment many times, occasionally over the years, and I struggle to understand where something is just a technical challenge. If people are involved, it's adaptive, right? There's always an adaptive component if people are involved. If you're working on a spreadsheet, probably technical, but you still got a human interacting with it, so it's adaptive potentially. So I just invite you now to think about what are the technical or the adaptive challenges that, the technical and adaptive parts of your challenge, and just reflect on that for, 2 minutes, please. So Alyssa, would a complex problem generally be a technical change? I think it'd be both. Absolutely a complicated one would be more likely to be, a technical solution would more likely be sufficient. But a complex change absolutely is adaptive. Did that answer your question? Welcome you're welcome to come off mute and have a quick chat if you like, but you're nodding, you're happy? Yep, cool. So yeah, any questions? I know this is a bit of a stretch. This is like a year-long program. normally to understand these. So we're asking a lot of you in a short period of time, but I'm gathering by some of the responses in the chat that you're kind of fairly advanced in thinking around this stuff. You're in a pretty good spot moving to where we're heading. So got them wrong way around. Got it. Yeah. How are we doing for time, Lou? Am I hopelessly over time?
No, you're going well.
Am I? Oh, that's
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Okay. I know that's a ridiculously short amount of time, but as Lou said, we're just trying to give you a bit of a taste and a feel for this. You've got the structure in the workbook, and hopefully we're talking through the important parts that helps you understand how it all fits together. Would someone like to either come off mute or pop one or two technical or adaptive things, or how you went with that? You know, does it make sense, or are you completely lost? Just while people are thinking about that, I think one of the important things to consider is how we're authorized in organizations and authorized in systems. And an easy way to understand this is we actually need both. We need to be able to do the technical well. If we can't run a meeting, if we don't, have time frames, if we don't, do some of the technical work, then we'll be deauthorized really quickly. And doing the technical work well allows us to work in the messy middle, the really iterative, complex, yeah, I said that, didn't I? Part of the challenge. So we need both effectively. No one's prepared to come off mute or put something in the chat.
I will.
Oh, well done. Thanks, Dane.
I guess my challenge is creating feedback culture and starting to relaunch annual reviews to kind of kick that off.
Right.
So thinking about the technical would be the actual, I guess the mechanism for actually doing that. So the forms, training, that kind of thing. And the adaptive, I was kind of thinking really around people manager capability, will, skill, kind of motivation. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, perfect. And also, there might be a piece around there to help people understand the importance of that and reframe, because often in organizations, as you know, we see, the annual performance review as a tick the box exercise in some organizations. So how do we reframe the central role of management is actually to develop their people. And if that's the central role of management and we frame it up like that, it's likely they'll give it more gravitas than they might if it's just a check the box exercise. So yeah, spot on. Well done. All right, thank you. I know I said that was the last bit, but I neglected this area. So this is a complex looking diagram, but what we're really trying to understand here is how much heat is in your challenge. Because the sad fact is that sometimes we're the only one who cares about our challenge. We're the only one who cares about changing something in the organization. And so how do we get people to a productive zone of disequilibrium where there's enough heat for change to happen, but there's not too much heat, because if there's too much heat, people will move into fight, flight, freeze. Then they'll move into work avoidance, where they will do anything they can to take the heat out of the system. Oh, it's not so much of a problem. We've already tried that. They might blame authority, anyone, but actually taking responsibility necessarily. So they might say, oh, it's a technical problem. Let's restructure. That'll fix it. Restructures often don't work because we haven't actually addressed the root causes. So how do we maintain that level of heat? So it might be asking really challenging questions or something else which gets people out of the cold bath or warm bath of low innovation, complacency, comfort zone into a space where actually we do need to change. You could call it the burning platform, but it's a little more, complex than just the burning platform, because we don't want to be so hot that people move into a place where they just can't engage or won't engage. So yeah, think about your challenge and how much heat is in it, and give it a rating, say between 1 and 10. 1 would be it's completely cold. I'm the only one who cares about this. 10, the system is in complete chaos and we need to somehow quell the system and reassure people to get them into a place where we can actually do the work. So yeah, so give yourself a score, or give the challenge a score, not yourself.
Phil,
Yeah.
can I ask a question? The line that you've got in there in terms of the disequilibrium and thinking about, say, an adaptive challenge or a technical problem, it then sort of drops right down post the change. Is the view to bring it right down after you've done a change?
Yeah, what happens is, that's right. So after the change is occurring and then over time, yeah, it becomes normalized.
Yeah, okay. So it's almost that sort of melt, freeze. What is it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Great.
All right, that just makes sense.
Thanks, Alyssa. All right, that's a pretty quick reflection point. It's just a number, right? So just pop that number in the chat, please, between 1 and 10, because your approach will be very different, right? Depending on what you score it. And the sad reality also is that unfortunately we can't generalize across a whole. We can average it out, but in your team, for example, if the challenge is within your team, you could have someone at a 1 and someone at a 10. And so we actually need to know our people. We need to connect with them, have those conversations, see where they're at. For some, we might have to light a little fire under them. And for others, we might have to reassure them, say it's all going to be okay, et cetera, et cetera. So 7, 6. Can others just put a quick number in? 7. Yes, there's a fair bit of heat in those, right? If we were at a 7 or even a 6 potentially.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, thank you so much. So we're going to continue to move on now. And as I said, we've really done part 2, diagnose the system, and we're going to move into people now, which Lou's going to take us through.
Great, thanks, Phil. So just going to take you through these last 3 parts swiftly. But the third part, discovery, we're still at the understanding phase. And often we're doing it at the same time as we're diagnosing, and also, as Phil mentioned, like adjusting our goals and sort of calibrating them in a way that supports our understanding as that deepens. But then we need to also focus on the people. Remember, it's people. Who do we need to influence and why? And then how are we engaging with them? Is that working, or do we need to also adjust that? One way to start to understand more about the people is to start to explore, where are the hidden alliances? When you're trying to lead adaptive change, it can lead to you recognizing how there's hidden alliances here between different groups, between different stakeholders, and when we recognize that, we realize that they can either make or break our initiative. So the more we know about it, the more we understand it, the more we can start to plan for it and adjust. Adapt. So one way, when we understand it, where the hidden alliances are, we can then work actively to how do we leverage the supportive alliances and how do we soften the opposing ones. And one way to do that, this is a lovely little tool that we've put in your workbook, is just exploring these different areas. Who's your stakeholder? What's their relationship to the issue? What are their outcomes? What are their values? What's important to them? Where do their loyalties lie? And what are their potential losses? And it's a lot what happens with change is people are not afraid of the change itself. They're fearful of what they could potentially lose. And sometimes that might be status, it might be remuneration, it might be being valued in a certain way, it might be connection. It can be so many range. What are they fearful of? Are there potential losses that they could be fearful of? So I just want to give you just 30 seconds, just capture one stakeholder and answer what you can in relation to those 6 areas. Obviously, you're not going to finish it, but just capture some salient points about one stakeholder, whether either an individual or a group. Okay, so I really encourage you to come back to this and think, broadly around who's involved, involved, and who do you need to influence, why and how. Start to develop that understanding, and then start thinking. And again, this is in your workbook. We're not going to do this today, but how strategies, acting politically. Who are your allies? Who are your opponents? And who are your senior authorities? And there's really clear reflection questions there with your allies. Why are they allies? What's their main objective and how can the allies support you? And then again with your opponents, why are they opponents? What do they stand to lose? Or what's if your initiative is successful, and how might you sort of neutralize that opposition? And then with your senior authorities, how do you engage them and harness their support? Or what are the messages that are coming from them to support your initiative? Or do you need to harness that in a particular way? So again, that's a piece that's in your workbook for you to absolutely dig into. The other side of people is self. So all great leadership in the world, all the great leaders, they have really deep levels of self-awareness and a commitment to keep developing. When we're thinking about influence, it's really useful for us to know what is our influencing style. And then if you can see here, how do we have an effect on character? These are the most common sort of influencing styles that, sort of come to mind. There's certainly others out there. If you look, do you rationalize? Do you come with data, facts, detail, bang, bang, bang? Do you, assert? Do you use authority or power or ways to come at situations that negates the opportunity for others at time, or you hold a certain level of authority in your influencing style? Do you negotiate? Do you come and inspire, like just through words and actions, the way that you show up? Or do you bridge or something else? It's really important that we know what our influencing styles are so that we can harness our strengths and then also flex and stretch and develop in ways that perhaps we haven't, but that would be useful for us. So I'm interested, just pop in the chat. What are your go-tos? Like what's your go-to influencing style? Who's unsure? Is anyone unsure? Like Lisa, inspiring, bridging. Yep. Jenny, bridging. Rebecca. Oh, great. Rationalizing. Yep. Marty, negotiating, bridging. Gay. Oh, Phil, no problem. Thank you, Gay. Her technology is so frustrating. Phil, bridging, connecting. I'm the same, I think. And Diane, rationalizing, bridging. Yeah, bit of everything depending on the stakeholder. Yeah, great. So the idea is that as leaders, and particularly when we're in an influencing challenge, that we harness, we recognize where our strengths are, and we develop when we know that we need to develop different ways. So if we continue exploring this, when we influence in a positive way, we also build trust. Trust is fundamental. And the good news is that we can actively build it. Here's the formula for it. Trust equals credibility, reliability, intimacy. What I mean by intimacy Do people feel safe coming to you with the hard stuff? Yeah. Less self-orientation. Now, the reason that we need to be aware as leaders, particularly in a challenge, when we're navigating challenge, enterprise challenge, is that trust is the foundation of all. Patrick Lencioni, he talks about this, the 5 dysfunctions of team. If we don't have trust, we can't have productive conflict, which doesn't allow commitment to the way forward, which doesn't allow accountability nor results. So we need to actively look at what are the trust levels like here? Do I need to improve them? How do I build them? And then the way we do that is that we, as I'm talking, just bring to mind one of your stakeholders. What are their credibility like? What's the trust levels like? What's their credibility? Can you trust what they're going to say, what they say about? What's the reliability? Can you trust them to do what they say they're going to do? With their intimacy, can you go to them with the hard stuff? And then less the self-orientation. This is about motives. Remember, so self, very much about the self-interest, or it's all about self versus all about other. We all need levels of self-interest. Who's ever had a leader, they're showing up, they're trying to influence, but their motive, it's all about them. Anyone? Yeah.
Who hasn't?
Who hasn't? Yeah, exactly. So what we need is we all need self-interest, but we also need to be influencing a way where the other person feels valued and they know that it's for the greater good. So that's really important. So we need to, understand the trust levels with our stakeholders. We also need to turn the mirror on ourselves. How am I building trust with others? Can people trust what I say? Do people know that I will do what I say I'm going to do? Can they come to me? And where is my self-interest sitting and how am I communicating that? So it's a really important lens that we always need to bring it back. So we literally spend hours on that. So that's a really quick introduction. The other one, I'm not going to spend any time on this, but it's the neuroscientific lens, understanding that we have threat reward stimulus. This model, it's a beautiful way of looking at these social domains. But thinking about in the way that we're showing up, in the way that we're influencing, recognizing and understanding our challenge, is it activating a reward stimulus for our stakeholders or a threat? And then how do we adjust that? Plenty of information out there that you can explore that more fully. And then this final one's about currency. Know your currency and know the currencies of your stakeholders. What do they value? And what are they potentially, what can be used as in the negotiation phase as well? What needs to be sustained? What can be let go when you come to the table? So this can be relationship based, it can be technically based. I'm just interested, look at that list. It's on page 28 in your book. And just for 30 seconds, what are your currencies? Just highlight them. We need to be really clear on that because that does influence the way that we influence, the way that we show up. So that really brings us, and once we've worked with the discovering about people, that they're the 3 components of understanding in the model, and you can see why you need to spend a lot of time there. And I'm sure this is why, because there's so much in there, organizations tend to skip over it and jump to the planning. But it's essential that we stay in that, we adapt, we build our understanding, adapt, and continue to let that evolve. Only then do we move to the planning, and this is the next stage. Once we have all that understanding, and obviously we're not going to do anything with this today because you need to do those first 3 sections first. Build your understanding before you then move into the plan, and always staying in contact with the other 3 models. What we have popped in your workbook are a couple of lenses and questions that will support you in your planning phase. So taking everything that you've collated and understood from those first 3 sections, and then also digging a little deeper as you go into a really structured influencing change plan. And then finally, we move on to the last, the influencing game. Phil, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, so the final part of the model, thanks, Lou. That was yeah, fantastic, particularly the trust model and the currency. We often don't think about currency. I'm working with an organization at the moment where one individual has strong currency, which is keeping her in the organization, if you like, and that is some of the relationships she has in senior government levels. And so that would be one currency she has, the established relationships with important people. So that's how we would think about that. And there's always multiple currencies, of course. So, and then the final part, yeah, is about persuasion. And this is where we engage in terms of the conversations we have, the meetings we might set up, who do we need to meet and when and why, what's the kind of purpose of doing that. So some of the key parts would be yeah, building trust with stakeholders. How do we get their attention? And so back to that, you know, how much heat is in the system, how much heat is in the challenge. And sometimes one of the currencies that we need is attention and to be authorized in the system, if you like, to do the work and to influence. As I said, if it's, as I previously said, if it's too high stakes in people's minds or risky, or they don't want to make the change, then they will do what they can. I know this sounds really horrible and manipulative, but they'll do what they can to deauthorize us as change agents. They will try and discredit us. They don't have a plan. They don't know what they're doing, you know, et cetera, because the change is seen as a threat for them. So we need to get attention, but in a way which is constructive. I can't remember which book I read it in, but there's one example in Europe, for example, where a person was trying to help the leadership team identify that they were using dozens and dozens and dozens of different suppliers for the same product on these rubber gloves, something like that in an industrial context. Couldn't get any attention, so purchased a rubber glove from each of the suppliers. It ended up being like 70 pairs of rubber gloves or something. Strolled into the leadership team meeting and threw them on the table. And they said, "What's this?" And I said, "These are all the different suppliers we have around rubber gloves." Now, you could say that's a pretty risky, gutsy move, but they made a call. They got attention. I'm not suggesting we do that. That could have ended badly. It ended well for this individual. But how do we get attention on our cause, and so we can make progress on it? Persuasion. So yeah, establish credibility, find common ground. Often in times of conflict, or we're trying to make things, you know, we talk about this in our conflict resolution modules and communication modules, is we can kind of be warring at this place. So we have a fixed position. And as Lou said earlier, how do we move to interests and needs, which is a deeper, more connecting way of thinking about it? Not this is my position, and we're just not going to move. What's the why of that? Yeah, how do we establish that common ground? And so we elevate also to a shared purpose. What do we both care about? And often the only thing we have in adaptive change or when we're trying to influence systems is a shared purpose and our values. Often that's all we have when we enter the arena, to use Brene Brown's metaphor. Don't rely on you know, a great argument or out intellectualizing people as we often do. You know, we try and outsmart people rather than use all the strategies we've been talking about today. Have real conversations, build safety, incremental steps. So as I said, we've said throughout this session is it's not, okay, this is our strategy and bang, we just deploy it over the next 12 months. It has to be an iterative learning process where we change, adapt, we move, we shift. And so it becomes about, in fact, I think it's on the next slide, it becomes about sense making. So, you know, putting the finger in the air, what's happening, what's our read, and then adjusting, sense making, where do we need to adapt or change our approach. And so it's much more of an agile, flexible approach. So in terms of those continuous steps, yeah, review the game plan regularly, understand what success looks like, knowing that it actually might change. One of the things about strategy and why strategy execution is so poorly implemented is because we hold on to a picture of success in 3 years and the world has already changed, right? So how do we continually, I said to someone yesterday and they were completely surprised, who they wanted to create a 10 to 50 year plan. I said, wow, 10 to 50 years, who'll know where we are and what we're doing by that stage? How about a 5 year plan and review it annually, if not quarterly? And I said, sounds like a good idea. What role have you played so far? What's been helpful? not helpful? What do you need to let go of as the change agent or the person doing the influencing? And yeah, keeping in mind changing our approach and being really flexible and adaptable around that. So this is how it all fits together. Again, you've got in your workbook, so you've got the 5 phases there, the key areas of focus and the reflection points and some key questions to ask around each one. So hopefully that's a cohesive kind of narrative, a cohesive structured approach to it in a potentially adaptive, messy context. So by way of wrapping up, love this quote by Mary Parker Follett: "Leadership is not defined by the exercise of power, but by the capacity to increase the sense of power among those we lead." And so how do we do that? How do we influence people, maintain their dignity, their respect, their identity, be attuned to what their triggers are, be attuned to the change, and work in that in a very adaptive, constructive way. And the final quote by Aaron Dignan, I love this. Whenever I've shown this or we've shown this quote, people go, yep, that's it. We don't have enough time to do our work, but we pack our days with endless meetings. We don't have the information we need, but we're buried in emails, documents, and data. We want speed and innovation, but we run from risk and inhibit our best people. We claim to work in teams, but we don't really trust one another. We know the way we're working isn't working, but we can't imagine an alternative. We long for change, but we don't know how to get it. So I'm really hoping that thus far, what we've provided and the frameworks is a cohesive way to think about creating more evolutionary, not revolutionary, more evolutionary organizations and change capacity and influence in whatever context you have in ways that have a much better chance of success than the old ways of top-down change. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Kelly.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Phil and Lou, for providing just a huge amount of value. Would love to just know one takeaway from everybody into the chat of what you're going to take out of this session and really start implementing in your day-to-day. We'd also like to open up for questions in just a moment. So maybe think about some of those questions that you'd really like to answered based on the content today. But before we do that, I'm also going to pop in a link, because as part of this workshop, you all have access to a 20-minute precision call, which is really designed to help you by that game plan for yourself and take what you've learned in this session back into your own organization. So if you haven't already booked your call, please pop in and do that now. And I'd also like to introduce you to, as you can see on the screen, an exciting new program that we've got coming up, which is called Amplify Plus. This is a group coaching program which is designed to help a really select group of senior leaders to step out of the weeds and into strategic influence so that they can really lead transformations, elevate their team, and build executive brand as well, and unlock the next level with real clarity and confidence. So this is essentially the next step from today. So as you can see, and I mentioned the Amplify model before here, this program is really designed to cover every single element of this Amplify model. So we're really working towards building that healthy, high-performing team that delivers on the strategy. So this program, what does it look like? In the first 30 days or 30 to 60 days, what we do is we help you to build your strategic impact plan. We clarify your team's purposes and priorities, and then start installing high impact delegation and accountability frameworks. So we can really pinpoint where you're doing the team's work instead of maybe the leading the team. And then also identify those capability gaps and bottlenecks that are slowing the progress down. So you can see here, phase 2 is all about strategic elevation. So it's how we build a high performance culture. How we expand influence and strategic leadership, so really following along from what we've covered today, and then also how we position you for what's next. So what does it really look like? We have leadership sessions on team development, influence and visibility, so quite similar to today's session, which would be what we've earmarked as the first Tuesday of the month. Then there's peer coaching and guided group sessions, so we take what we've learnt in those leadership sessions and really unpack that for you. It's really based around a high caliber network of senior leaders who can challenge each other and back each other as well. So it's about building some camaraderie within different organizations. It's also about strategic career planning and giving you some tools for strategic career planning as well. So if you are leading a team or a function in a fast moving or complex or evolving business, and if you have at least 5 years or more of leadership experience, whether that's formal or informal, and if you're ready to lead at a whole new level, maybe you're hungry and just willing to challenge yourself and your team to be better. Maybe you feel stretched, but you're really committed because you're doing it all yourself and that maybe isn't working. And if you really want that real world impact and not just the theory or the self-help, it's really about how we can help you elevate. So if that does sound like you, we would love to invite you to apply. So I'm just going to pop that application link in the chat as well for you to have a look at. It's got all the details there about the program. So applications close on the 31st of October. So it's a 2-minute application, and then we'll book in a time to connect. Make sure it's the right fit because we really want to make sure that the group is full of high caliber leaders. And then we'll get you set up and book in your strategic impact plan so that you know exactly where to focus on for maximum momentum. So as I mentioned, this is really more for senior leaders with 5 or more years experience, but maybe if you're not quite at that point, or if you have team members that are within your team that you'd like to develop, we've got a lot of other options as well for emerging and mid-level leaders too. So our signature Excellence, which Louise runs and does a fantastic job through that program. And that's based around our leadership excellence model. So all around human-centered leadership. And it's a fantastic program, a 6-week program for emerging and mid-level leaders. And then we also have Dare to Lead, which is based on Brene Brown's work. And as Brene Brown says, who we are is how we lead. It really starts with leading self and then moving through to leading teams. So just as a thank you for coming today, we've got a 50% off our upcoming Dare to Lead program, which starts just next week. We also have Leadership Excellence there starting a couple of weeks later as well. So there's a couple of incentives there for you if that's the right fit. But for now, I'd really love to open up for some questions. If you do have any questions, would love to hear them into the chat. And if you wanted to come off mute and ask questions, that's also wonderful. Alyssa's popped into that chat here. Lots was helpful. For me, the first reminder to observe first, yes, and think about interpretation of those and asking people to think about the alternatives that could be helpful. Fantastic, Alyssa. Thank you for sharing. Any other thoughts, questions, observations that anybody would like to share at this point? Surely we kind of covered everything in an hour and a half.
Hey, we've still got several people on the call. It'd be great just to even get a one word in the chat about something you're thinking about or taking away. So Alyssa's the early adopter. Well done, Alyssa.
Phil, Marty, I was just going to, like checking in interpretations for me about, we make and checking them on the observation and maybe using our group to check the interpretation so we've got a consistency.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks, Marty. It's such a simple looking tool, but it really is, the results you can get are pretty amazing. So Alyssa, thank you. Thanks, Rebecca. Love the approach to deep stakeholder analysis. Absolutely. Templates are great. Take away and really pad out my thinking and accepts. Awesome. Thanks, Jenny. Time to stop, review, and do the work. Yeah. Thanks, Alyssa. Thanks, Diane, rather. Stakeholder analysis. Yeah. Allies versus opponents. Yeah, we don't think about it in those ways, do we? But and authority, right? How do we partner with authority to make progress? We often don't think about that either. We kind of go to higher authority to get approval, but how do we partner with them to make progress? So fantastic. Over to you, Kelly, to wrap up, I think.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for being here today. We really appreciate you spending the time with us, and would love to see you on one of our programs. Particularly, we're keen to see you on the precision calls as well, and we can chat through more a strategic approach that is tailored to you and your organisation.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks,
Really
everyone.
appreciate your attendance. Bye.
Have a great day. Thanks.